Catching the golden snitch has never been more fun. Hello there guys, my name is Squawker and welcome to the Harry Potter Quidditch World Cup review. About average for a PS2 game is what I would say overall for the graphics in this game. There is nothing particularly special about them and they fit the bill just fine. But I guess by saying that I have implied that the graphics miss that little touch of magic that takes graphics from being serviceable to being gobsmackingly great, where you just want to sit and stare for hours on end while barely touching your controller. So yeah, the graphics are functional and everything's pretty easy to see and stands out nicely, though I will add that the anti-aliasing in this game seems to be practically non-existent, which can start to become a bit sore on the eyes over time. Technically there seems to be no glitches lurking within the graphics, which is another good point, and the face comes off as realistic enough, you know. The faces have features, mouths actually move, and facial expressions seem to function without venturing into the uncanny valley. But I don't know, at the end of the day, while I said that these graphics are serviceable, they didn't really manage to capture the intense and fast feel of the way Quidditch was portrayed in the books and films. But this could be more of a gameplay issue. Speaking of which... Quidditch is an utterly unique game, and I remember it being quite enthralling when I first read The Philosopher's Stone back in the day. And I felt that the films also really made the game of Quidditch really come to life with the intense speeds, ducking and diving around the bludgers and the sheer verticality of it all. Even the opening cutscene of this game managed to deliver that feel and set you up for taking part in what really felt like a scene from the films. However, what we received in the actual game sadly did not live up to those expectations and honestly came across as really bland and unchallenging. Before we go any deeper into this section, here's a super duper quick breakdown of the rules of Quidditch. Each team has 3 chasers who are basically your mainline players. They throw around a big red ball known as a quaffle to try and score points in opposing teams' goals for 10 points apiece. Both teams have a keeper to guard these hoops, and the bludgers are rogue balls seeking to batter players off their brooms. They don't discriminate and will attack anyone that they can find, but they can be nudged around and guided by the 2 beaters, which are possessed by both teams. And the seekers seek to end the game by catching the golden snitch, which nets you a tasty 150 points and in my opinion is a bit of a bullshit mechanic. But this is not a rant on how bullshit the snitch rule is, despite it basically existing to suddenly fuck you over if you've been playing well, but you were only leading by 140 points, which is the equivalent of 14 goals. Now, this is a not quite rant on just how repetitive and unimaginative the gameplay is. Firstly, there is almost no verticality at all. For a game in which flying is the main staple of the game, this makes up the bulk of gameplay very two-dimensional, and the controls for flying a broom come across as stodgy and slow. And since the majority of each match you will also be playing in the role of a chaser, you better get used to these pretty crap controls and the very repetitive, not quite dash to the enemy goal to sink your quaffle through the hoop, because the difficulty in this game is laughable. Before being released into the World Cup, you had to complete the Hogwarts tournament, which is a handy tutorial to get you acquainted with the basics, and cleverly staggers out matches in between learning sessions to give plenty of room to put what is being learned into practice, which I really approve of. But once you've beaten the tutorial, you will only have access to the 2 lowest difficulty levels, which are absolute cakewalks. The way you unlock additional difficulty levels is through collecting cards, which are unlocked from completing simple tasks to some slightly more complex ones. However, just through one playthrough of World Cup mode, I barely scraped enough cards together to unlock the 3rd difficulty level, since the card thresholds are set really high, and I was dominating every match to the point where it was boring. Long story short, all difficulty levels should have been available from the outset to the player, so, you know, you can set your own difficulty of challenge rather than being turned off due to all the grind involved. Another thing that really bugs me about the main portion of the match is pulling off special moves, since aiming a pass is pretty much a total crapshoot because it's a pain to work out where your teammate is and who you will be passing it to, and given how your opponent actually just aimlessly flies around, being intercepted mid-pass isn't really a thing. So there is literally no strategy to this game apart from passing until you're close enough to shoot, and you'll basically have a 33% chance of being intercepted by the goalkeeper and a more likely chance of just being intercepted by an opponent, since you have little saying where you can actually pass the quaffle. When you're not in possession as well, there is little to do in a way of getting a quaffle back, as just spamming the tackle button will just basically result in some sort of lethargic thrust forward to attempt to snatch the quaffle. And once more, there isn't really any strategy to apply here, like, you know, cutting someone off, heading them off at the pass, since you can't willy-nilly switch players or anything. You're just basically locked into the role of one person. And it does suck, really, that you only really ever play as the seeker, the chaser, and to the extremely limited extent the keeper. You know, it'd be fun to play as, like, you know, like the bludger or something, or stuff like that, which you kind of do as well, since you are given access to random special moves, but the way they're assigned is just completely random. I mean, you'll basically just be randomly sometimes given the ability to do a dodge, or you'll be randomly given the ability to smash a bludger into someone, or do a slightly fancier tackle than usual, but there's no criteria for hitting these. These are just awarded at random, as is the team special move as well, which completely makes no sense, like, because you just get assigned it whenever the game feels like. I mean, there's no criteria hitting. I mean, even your opponent teams will be randomly assigned it, and even when they're just playing absolutely terrible, so it's just like, you know, just an attempt to give them a free goal. So it just makes no sense, really, the way free moves are assigned to people. And really, the only time speed really becomes a thing as well is when you try and chase down the golden snitch, which is probably the highlight of every match, since it is pretty cool to be flying at high speeds trying to chase a little thing down, but at the same time it is hemorrhaged by the really bizarre and random path the snitch will take around the map, which basically results in random 90-degree turns, very sharp turns, and it can basically make handling your broom extremely hard, and, you know, you're being thrown side to side. And to be honest as well, the bad difficulty just makes this section woefully unbalanced, since boost is assigned based on the performance of your team overall during a match. So if you're playing well, it's going to be very unbalanced, as you'll basically have all the boost in the world and your opponent's going to have none. So that's the stakes gone, and no tension there, really, unfortunately.
Yeah! 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 Get ready, guys!
Overall, it's above average. The music keeps in line with the Harry Potter tradition, or at least the scoring of the Warner Brothers films, and has a strong orchestral score. Not Star Wars or Lord of the Rings levels of epic music, but it's doing its job in a nice way that's pleasing to the ears. The music also adapts to the current situation in a match, be it stitch chasing, general passing, tackling, or about to score a goal, though admittedly the transition of music in between the general phase and the scoring phase is a little bit jarring, could have maybe been meshed a little bit better. I also like how each team has their own anthem, and they are really awesome and fit each team really well. It would just be nice to have them appear in the actual matches rather than just in a pre-match build-up though. And the sound effects are at the right level of volume to create immersion, though at the same time somewhat lacking, but no killer criticisms exist, and there are some cool little subtle touches, like each peach having a unique goal noise, and just the audience chanting the name of your team. Voice acting has its ups and downs, with some actors doing a competent to good job and others coming across as distracting. I'd say the best voice acting would easily go to Ludo Bagman, who commentates the international matches. He comes across exactly as I imagined him when I first read The Goblet of Fire, as a posh but bombastic bombastic lover of good sports, though on the flip side his co-commentators have somewhat annoying accents, with the French commentator standing out as particularly annoying with her highly exaggerated French accent, which is not particularly aided by her limited speech bank, something Ludo suffers from less since his voice is just brilliant and I can just listen to all of his quotes over and over again. The players themselves also have varied voice acting. Some do okay, like the American and the English teams, they do alright. But others, like the Germans and Japanese, quickly get annoying with their tendency to shout distractingly loud whenever intercepting or tackling on the field, which is a great way to suddenly snap one immersion.
Yeah! 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 Get ready, guys!
There isn't really much of a story here, but honestly that kind of works in the favour to this game in a limited extent. What this game does is it takes a deeper look at one of the favourite pastimes in the wizarding world, which is Quidditch, and it manages to do it in a light-hearted and fun way without getting dragged down into some miasma of Voldemort, Chosen Ones, and all that magical genocide, race purity bollocks, which, you know, that cat stuff kind of just bogged down Harry Potter as the series went on. But what we got here was, you know, the fun side, the light side, the cool side, you know, that bit from the first few movies where it was all amazing and cool. But that being said, however, the lore of this game is quite shallow and it doesn't really go nearly as deep as it could go. And it is a shame, since the earlier books in the Harry Potter series were great for just randomly going into random facts within trivia, such as one which I always remembered was a witch called Wendelin the Weird, who would purposely get caught by witch hunters so they could trick the medieval idiots with a fire immunity charm which just makes the fire tickle. And this game doesn't really do that, sadly. And I mean, it would have been cool to not only just play Quidditch in this game, but to have just learned a little bit more about how, you know, the sport took off, the lore behind the stadiums, and the international teams, and all sorts of really cool random trivia. I mean, it could have even just been squeezed into the loading screen rather than every loading screen just showing me the controls. Also, the teams do come off as rather bland. Other sporting games such as FIFA don't really need to worry about this, since the teams are made up of, you know, all the great and the good of football. But in Quidditch World Cup, we've basically got teams which have been made up just for this game, but really the extent that has been achieved is we've just got players who just look and sound fitting with their team, and that's about it. There's no personality or quirks or backstory. And at the end of the day, the only story there really is in this game is the story of your team as you progress towards winning the World Cup. And sadly, the overly long layout of a tournament does not really make this much of a thrilling story, which comes with high stakes, since the tournament operates on a league table basis rather than a more thrilling knockout basis. So you will be playing every team twice, and since there's no adversity due to the pretty awful difficulty, you won't be getting any low points, high points, or rivalries, or any form of adversity within this tale you are writing.
Yeah! 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 Get ready, guys!
There's some replay value to this game, but not a huge amount. But at the same time enough to warrant returning to this game maybe once or twice. The adequately sized roster of teams is a positive, but this is only on a face value, sadly, as the only difference is cosmetic, as all teams basically have the same stats, abilities, and the only gameplay difference is what the team special move you will have available to yourself. But since, like I've said earlier, the game will basically hand these out at random, it doesn't really make a difference at all. Well, some may score more goals than others, but yeah. There is also an exhibition match mode for some instant action gameplay if you'd like, and the Hogwarts mode also doubles up as challenge mode, but the challenges are not really that hard once you get to grips with the controls, and it's really presented in more of a tutorial fashion, so you'll master it pretty quickly. And since the gameplay is so simplistic, you're not really going to be mentally challenged in any way as well. Winning a World Cup also does unlock something known as Quidditch, which sadly is not a bizarre new game mode, but a bonus stadium that can only be played on by Hogwarts teams, which kind of sucks because I would have liked to have had some international teams playing there, but it does act as an interesting change of scenery with the medieval music, I guess. And it's also a bit of a shame, speaking of international teams as well, they actually can't take on the Hogwarts teams, but I guess it may be something to do with having to record more lines for Ludo Bagman or something like that. I guess what the game has going for it overall in terms of replay value is the collectible card system, which will take a fair chunk of your time to gather them all, and none of the cards are outright impossible to obtain. That being said though, quite a few cards are a grind, such as one for winning a World Cup with every team, which is a wholly legit concept, but not a fun one, given how I said earlier, the structure of a World Cup mode is overly long and boring, and I don't really find myself wanting to commit several hours to basically beating an overly long World Cup, especially when you can't sim matches, which I know sounds lazy, but yeah. The only cards that really do provide some challenge is the ones that involve like winning the matches without scoring any goals or losing and still catching the goals. Those ones are quite challenging, but they're too few and far in between for my liking. Difficulty variation does also exist within this game, but as mentioned, the upper difficulties are locked away by a grind wall of cards, which basically traps you in the lower difficulties initially, and the higher difficulties sadly don't present much more challenge, because since by the time you've done all that grinding, you're basically so good, you'll just basically walk the new difficulty level anyway. And any mistakes I actually did find myself committing on the higher difficulty was purely just down to the game screwing up rather than my own incompetency, which is a totally legit excuse as well, because the AI didn't really demonstrate any form of increased skill. Also, as an added touch, there is local multiplayer, which works okay, but given how long matches can last, I cannot say this would be my go-to game if I was hosting a PlayStation 2 party when games such as Thrillville and FIFA and Tom and Jerry War of the Whiskers are within my arm's reach for some quick, split-screen instant action.
Yeah! 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 Get ready, guys! Yeah! 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 Get ready, guys!
So that's the Harry Potter review over and done with, and well, at the end of the day, it's got about halfway. I think that's about appropriate. I'd say this is probably a average PlayStation 2 game, not one of the all-star great ones that we all tend to remember from our childhood, but at the same time, it was a competent game that did its job well. It set out with an ambition to try and capture the sport of Quidditch in video game form, and given the technology they had and everything like that, you know what, I think they still pulled off a pretty good job. What we ended up with at the end of the day was a game that was functional, but didn't quite fully capture the imagination, which is what I feel lacks the most. Apart from other things like, yeah, the difficulty in the gameplay could have been a little bit better. But overall, you know, it's a harmless game. It isn't outright doing anything offensive or wrong. It's just, you know, doing its thing. And there are other games that also do their thing, and some do it well, some do it not so well. The next review that we're going to be looking at in a very, very short amount of time will be an example of a game being competent and functional, but for the wrong reasons. For at least with this game, it really did try to reach for the sky, whereas in this next one, well, we may say the sky's the limit, but this guy's nowhere near that limit. Not at all. See you there, my friends, and I hope you've enjoyed this review.